In the quiet little town of Serenity Bay, life moved at a gentle pace. Nestled between rolling green hills and thick forests, this coastal gem was home to Willow Creek Estates, a neighborhood that prided itself on its charm and tranquility. The heart of the community wasn't just the rows of neatly painted houses or manicured lawns, it was something far more special. Flowing through the estate was a historic tidal waterway, winding its way like a ribbon of silver under the sun. This waterway had been there long before anyone could remember, carved by nature's hand centuries ago. It wasn't just beautiful. It was alive. For generations, people living near the waterway cherished it for what it offered. Families would gather along its banks during summer evenings, watching fireflies dance above the calm surface. Kids loved skipping stones across the shallow parts, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. Birdwatchers came from miles away to spot herons standing still as statues and ospreys diving dramatically into the water to catch fish. Even history buffs appreciated the stories tied to the waterway, how indigenous tribes once used it as a trade route, and how early settlers relied on it for transportation and food. Emma Carter, a retired marine biologist in her late 60s, had fallen in love with the place the moment she saw it. She'd spent decades studying oceans and rivers around the world, but when she retired, all she wanted was peace. And peace is exactly what she found here. Every morning, Emma would grab her kayak and glide silently along the waterway, soaking in the sights and sounds. She knew every bend, every cluster of reeds, and every family of ducks that called the waterway home. To her, it wasn't just a body of water. It was a living, breathing part of the community. But not everyone shared Emma's perspective. Beneath the serene surface of Willow Creek Estates, tensions simmered. The Homeowners Association, HOA, responsible for maintaining the neighborhood's upkeep, had grown increasingly frustrated with certain aspects of the waterway. Over the years, they'd received complaints about erosion eating away at backyards, fallen branches clogging pathways, and occasional flooding during heavy rains. Some residents felt uneasy about these issues, especially those whose homes sat closest to the water. They worried about safety and rising insurance premiums. Others simply thought the waterway looked messy and untamed. The HOA board, made up of 5 volunteers elected annually by homeowners, decided it was time to take action. At one of their monthly meetings, a bold proposal was put forward. Why not fill in parts of the waterway with concrete? The idea seemed practical enough. By doing so, they could stabilize the land, prevent future erosion, and even create additional usable space for recreation or parking. Plus, it would make the area look tidier, which might increase property values. For some members of the board, fixing the waterway meant controlling it, shaping it into something predictable and manageable. When the topic came up for discussion, opinions were divided. Emma attended the meeting, hoping to voice her concerns alongside other environmentally conscious neighbors. She explained how tampering with the waterway could harm the delicate ecosystem that depended on it. Fish needed clear waters to survive, birds relied on specific plants growing along the banks, and the entire system played a role in filtering runoff before it reached larger bodies of water downstream. But despite her passionate plea, many homeowners dismissed her warnings. After all, the waterway flowed mostly through private property. Surely, they argued, they had the right to manage it however they pleased. The vote took place shortly after, and much to Emma's dismay, the majority sided with the HOA board. Those in favor believed the benefits outweighed the risks. A few vocal opponents tried to delay the decision, suggesting the HOA consult experts or seek permits from state agencies first. However, the board brushed off these suggestions, confident that the project fell entirely within their jurisdiction. With approval secured, construction crews were hired almost immediately, and work began without further delay. At first, most residents didn't pay much attention. Life went on as usual. Children played in their yards, dogs barked happily, and cars rolled down the streets. But soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. One crisp autumn morning, the peaceful hum of nature was shattered by the roar of bulldozers and the clanging of machinery. Dust filled the air as workers hauled truckloads of cement to the water's edge. Sections of the once flowing channel were sealed off, replaced by rigid slabs of gray concrete. What had once been a lively habitat now resembled a barren scar. Emma stood frozen on her porch, watching the destruction unfold. Her heart sank as memories flooded back. The countless mornings she'd spent paddling through sparkling waters, the joy of spotting rare wildlife, the sense of connection she felt to something greater than herself. Now it was disappearing right before her eyes. She wasn't alone in her despair. Other neighbors started noticing unsettling signs. The familiar chirping of crickets faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Dead fish floated belly up in stagnant pools where water had pooled unnaturally. Birds, once abundant, vanished altogether. Days turned into weeks. Doubts began creeping into the minds of even those who had initially supported the project. Sure, the waterway looked neater now, but at what cost? Some wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. Yet, the HOA leadership remained steadfast, assuring everyone that the changes were necessary and beneficial in the long run. They promised smoother sailing ahead, literally and figuratively. Little did they know the real storm was yet to come. The transformation of the waterway unfolded quickly, but its effects rippled far beyond what anyone had anticipated. What was once a vibrant, flowing channel teeming with life became a lifeless expanse of concrete and mud. The bulldozers arrived, early each morning, their rumbling engines breaking the quiet peace that residents had come to cherish. Dust filled the air, coating cars, windows, and even laundry left out to dry. The pristine image of Willow Creek Estates, so carefully maintained by the HOA, was now marred by chaos and destruction. As the days passed, the changes grew more pronounced. Sections of the waterway disappeared entirely under layers of gray cement, choking off the natural flow of water. Fish that once darted through the currents were trapped in shallow pools, gasping for oxygen as the ecosystem collapsed around them. Birds, which had flocked to the area for generations, abandoned their nests. The rustling of leaves and chirping of crickets gave way to an unsettling silence. Even the plants along the banks, wildflowers, reeds, and shrubs that had thrived in the damp soil, began to wilt and die. It was as if the soul of the neighborhood had been sucked out overnight. Emma Carter watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. Each day she walked down to the edge of the waterway, hoping against hope that some remnant of its former beauty might remain. But every visit left her more disheartened than the last. One afternoon she spotted a group of children standing near the newly concreted section, poking at a puddle where a few stranded minnows struggled to survive. Their faces were solemn, their usual laughter absent. Why did they do this? One of them asked, looking up at Emma with wide, confused eyes. She didn't have an answer that could make sense of what had happened. Word of the changes spread quickly among the residents. Neighbors who had initially supported the project began to voice their concerns. At first, these murmurs were quiet. Whispers, over backyard fences, or hesitant comments during casual conversations. But as the weeks went on, the discontent grew louder. Some homeowners noticed strange smells wafting from the altered waterway, a sour odor that clung to the air and made it hard to breathe. Others reported seeing rodents scurrying across their lawns, displaced by the loss of their natural habitat. The HOA's promise of a cleaner, safer environment seemed further away than ever. For Emma, the situation felt personal. This wasn't just about aesthetics or property values. It was about losing something irreplaceable. She spent hours poring over old photographs of the waterway, reminders of how alive it had once been. In one picture, taken just a year earlier, sunlight danced on the surface of the water, reflecting off the wings of a blue heron perched nearby. Another showed a family of ducks gliding effortlessly past lily pads. These images weren't just memories. They were proof of what the community stood to lose forever. Determined to fight back, Emma began reaching out to her neighbors. She organized informal gatherings in her backyard, inviting anyone willing to listen. Over cups of tea and homemade cookies, she shared her knowledge of ecosystems and explained why tampering with the waterway was so dangerous. "This isn't just our property," she told them. "It's part of a much bigger system. When you damage one piece, everything else suffers. Her words struck a chord with many, especially those who had grown up fishing or swimming in the Waterway. Slowly but surely, a small coalition of concerned residents began to form. Despite their growing numbers, however, the group faced significant pushback. Members of the HOA board dismissed their concerns, insisting that the project was already underway and couldn't be stopped. "We're doing this for the good of the community," one board member declared at a heated meeting. "If we don't take action now, we'll regret it later." Others argued that the Waterway was private property and therefore not subject to state regulations. They pointed to legal documents and property deeds as evidence, brushing aside any mention of environmental laws or protected habitats. But Emma refused to give up. With the help of her newfound allies, she started documenting the changes happening around them. Armed with cameras and notebooks, they captured images of dying wildlife, stagnant pools, and eroded banks. They interviewed older residents who remembered the Waterway in its prime, collecting stories that painted a vivid picture of what had been lost. One elderly woman recalled how her father used to row a small boat along the channel, teaching her how to identify different bird calls. Another man described how the Waterway had served as a natural barrier during storms, absorbing floodwaters and protecting homes. These accounts added depth and urgency to their cause. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating about potential legal trouble. A few sharp-eyed residents noticed inspectors visiting the site, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes and taking measurements. Someone mentioned seeing a drone hovering overhead, capturing aerial footage of the altered Waterway. Speculation ran wild. Was the state getting involved? Could the HOA face consequences for its actions? While no one knew for sure, the mere possibility sent shockwaves through the community. Tensions reached a boiling point when a local newspaper published an article about the controversy. The headline read, "Willow Creek Estates Under Fire for Altering Historic Waterway." Accompanying the story were stark before and after photos showing the dramatic transformation. Readers flooded the comment section, weighing in with opinions ranging from outrage to disbelief. Environmental groups caught wind of the situation and began investigating, suspecting violations of wetland protection laws. Activists posted videos online, highlighting the ecological devastation and calling for accountability. Back in Willow Creek Estates, the backlash hit hard. Residents who had stayed silent until now found themselves questioning whether the HOA had acted recklessly or, worse, illegally. Board members, once confident in their authority, started to look uneasy. Behind closed doors, they debated how to respond to the growing scrutiny. Some suggested issuing a public apology and halting construction immediately. Others dug in their heels, insisting that admitting fault would only invite lawsuits and financial ruin. As the battle lines were drawn, Emma and her group prepared for the fight of their lives. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they couldn't stand by and let the Waterway be destroyed without a fight. For Emma, this wasn't just about preserving nature. It was about setting an example for future generations. If they succeeded in reversing the damage, they could show the world that it was possible to coexist with the environment rather than dominate it. And if they failed? Well, that was a thought too painful to consider. Little did they know. The worst was yet to come. The storm clouds gathering over Willow Creek Estates weren't just metaphorical. They were real, both in terms of weather and legal fallout. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing was clear. The fight to save the Waterway had only just begun. The day the $620,000 fine landed on the doorstep of Willow Creek Estates, it felt like a bomb had gone off in the community. The HOA board members, who until then had tried to maintain an air of confidence, were visibly shaken. Some looked pale as they read the letter from state regulators, while others exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a financial tsunami that threatened to drown the entire neighborhood under debt and legal trouble. For many residents, the fine confirmed their worst fears. The decision to alter the Waterway had been reckless, short-sighted, and ultimately disastrous. Panic spread quickly through the community. Homeowners gathered in clusters discussing the news with hushed voices. "How are we supposed to pay for this?" asked one man at a crowded emergency meeting, his face red with frustration. Another woman chimed in, her voice trembling with anger. "They told us this would improve our property values, but now we're all going to lose everything." The room buzzed with tension as accusations flew back and forth. Fingers pointed at the HOA board, whose members sat awkwardly at the front of the room, avoiding eye contact with their furious neighbors. Board members attempted to defend themselves, but their explanations fell flat. "We thought we were doing what was best for the community," stammered Greg Peterson, the HOA president. His words were met with jeers and shouts. "Best for who? Your bank account?" someone yelled from the back of the room. Another homeowner stood up, holding a stack of soggy photos salvaged from her flooded basement. "This is what you've done to us," she cried, slamming the pictures onto the table. The images showed ruined furniture, waterlogged carpets, and cherished family mementos destroyed by the floods. It was impossible to ignore the human cost of the HOA's actions. As tempers flared, cracks began to form within the HOA itself. Several board members resigned immediately, citing stress and public backlash. One of them, Carol Myers, tearfully, admitted during a private conversation with Emma Carter that she regretted voting in favor of the project. "I trusted the others when they said it was safe," Carol confessed, "but now I realize how wrong we were." Others refused to step down, insisting they'd acted in good faith, even as personal liability lawsuits piled up against them. These lawsuits came not only from disgruntled homeowners, but also from environmental groups seeking justice for the damaged ecosystem. In the midst of the chaos, Emma Carter emerged as a stabilizing force. Her calm demeanor and deep understanding of the situation earned her respect from both sides of the debate. She didn't shy away from criticizing the HOA's mistakes, but she also urged the community to focus on solutions rather than blame. "We can't keep fighting each other," she said during a particularly heated meeting. "If we want to fix this, we need to work together." Emma's leadership inspired others to take action. A group of concerned residents formed a task force dedicated to navigating the fallout from the fine and planning the waterway's restoration. They worked tirelessly, drafting petitions, organizing fundraisers, and collaborating with state officials to negotiate a more manageable payment schedule. Their efforts paid off when regulators agreed to allow the HOA to pay the fine in installments over several years, provided they committed to restoring the waterway as part of the agreement. But the challenges didn't end there. New leadership. Elections were scheduled, and candidates campaigned fiercely, promising transparency, accountability, and better communication moving forward. Many residents demanded stricter guidelines for future projects, including mandatory environmental impact assessments and public input before any decisions were made. Emma herself declined to run, choosing instead to focus on advocacy work. She believed her role was to educate and guide, not to hold a formal position of power. One of the biggest hurdles was addressing the emotional toll the crisis had taken on the community. Trust between neighbors had eroded, and old friendships were strained or broken altogether. To rebuild those connections, Emma organized regular gatherings where people could share their experiences and frustrations openly. Over coffee and homemade snacks, residents began to heal. Stories poured out about flooded basements, lost heirlooms, and sleepless nights spent worrying about finances. Through these conversations, people realized they weren't alone in their struggles. Slowly, bonds began to mend. Meanwhile, plans for restoring the waterway took shape. State ecologists partnered with local experts, including Emma, to design a comprehensive rehabilitation strategy. The first step involved removing sections of the concrete barriers that had disrupted the natural flow of water. Bulldozers returned to the scene, but this time, their purpose was different. Workers carefully dismantled the hardened slabs, allowing water to flow freely once again. Dead fish and debris were cleared away, and native plants were reintroduced along the banks to stabilize the soil and provide habitat for wildlife. Volunteers played a crucial role in the restoration efforts. Families turned out in droves to help plant trees, scatter wildflower seeds, and clean up trash left behind by the construction. Children joined in too, learning about ecosystems and the importance of protecting natural resources. One Saturday morning, Emma led a group of kids in building birdhouses to attract nesting birds back to the area. As they hammered nails and painted wooden planks, laughter filled the air. A welcome change from the somber mood that had dominated the community for months. Despite these positive steps, reminders of the past lingered. Patches of bare earth still marked the spots where concrete had been removed, and some sections of the waterway remained sluggish and lifeless. But even in its damaged state, signs of renewal began to emerge. Tiny green shoots poked through the mud, signaling the return of native vegetation. Dragonflies darted across the surface of the water, and frogs croaked softly in the evenings. These small victories gave hope to everyone involved in the project. For Emma, the progress was bittersweet. She knew the road to full recovery would be long and difficult, requiring patience and persistence. Yet she couldn't help feeling proud of how far the community had come since the darkest days of the crisis. What started as a divisive and destructive chapter in Willow Creek Estate's history had transformed into a story of resilience and redemption. People who had once argued bitterly now worked side by side, united by a shared goal: to restore the waterway and protect it for future generations. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and shorter days, the pace of restoration slowed, but didn't stop. Volunteers continued to show up, determined to see the project through. At a holiday gathering hosted by Emma, residents gathered around a bonfire sharing stories and reflecting on the year's events. Someone suggested naming the restored waterway after Emma, but she quickly dismissed the idea. "This isn't about me," she said with a smile. "It's about all of us working together to make things right." Though the scars of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, the spirit of cooperation and determination that had taken root in Willow Creek Estates offered a promising glimpse of what lay ahead. The waterway might never look exactly as it did before, but with care and effort it could thrive again. And in doing so, it would serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of respecting nature and learning from mistakes. For Emma and her neighbors, the journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the future felt hopeful. The changes to the waterway didn't just alter the landscape. They set off a chain reaction that no one had fully anticipated. Within months, Mother Nature herself seemed to push back against the concrete barriers and hardened banks. Heavy rains swept through Serenity Bay, as they often did during the fall season, but this time something was different. Without the natural flow of the waterway to absorb excess water, storm surges overwhelmed drainage systems, spilling into basements, garages, and even living rooms. Homes once considered safe were now vulnerable, their foundations weakened by relentless flooding. Emma Carter stood ankle-deep in muddy water, staring at the chaos unfolding around her. Her own home, which sat farther from the waterway than most, had escaped the worst of it, but many of her neighbors weren't so lucky. Down the street, Sarah and Mark Johnson frantically piled sandbags against their front door, trying to hold back the rising tide. Across the cul-de-sac, the Thompson family scrambled to salvage photo albums and keepsakes from their flooded basement. The air buzzed with the hum of sump pumps and the shouts of panicked residents. What struck Emma most was how quickly the community's mood shifted. Just weeks earlier, some homeowners had defended the HOA's decision, claiming it would solve long-standing issues like erosion and debris buildup. Now those same people found themselves knee-deep in problems far worse than anything they'd faced before. "This never happened when the waterway was natural," muttered Tom Riley, a retired contractor who lived near the edge of the property line. He gestured toward his soggy backyard, where water pooled ominously against the freshly poured concrete. "We messed with something we didn't understand." As the storms continued, insurance claims poured in, overwhelming local agents. Premiums skyrocketed for everyone in Willow Creek Estates, not just those directly affected by the flooding. Tempers flared at HOA meetings, where accusations flew like arrows. Some residents demanded answers, while others pointed fingers at the board members who had spearheaded the project. "You told us this would fix things," shouted Linda Harper, a mother of 3 whose garage was now unusable. "Instead, you've made everything worse." Amid the turmoil, Whispers of legal trouble began to spread. Environmental activists, tipped off by concerned residents, descended on Willow Creek Estates armed with cameras, notebooks, and determination. They documented every inch of the altered waterway, capturing images of dead fish floating in stagnant pools, barren stretches of concrete, and eroded banks crumbling into the mud. One activist, a young woman named Rachel, spent hours interviewing homeowners about the impact of the flooding. "Do you think the HOA considered how this would affect the ecosystem?" she asked Emma during one such conversation. Emma sighed, shaking her head. "I don't think they cared," she replied. "They saw the waterway as a problem to be solved, not a living system to be protected." Rachel nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes. She promised to share the findings with state regulators, who had already begun investigating the situation. After seeing news reports about the controversy, the investigation brought unwelcome attention to Willow Creek Estates. State officials arrived unannounced one crisp November morning, clad in waterproof boots and carrying measuring tools. They walked along the waterway, examining the concrete barriers and taking samples of the stagnant water. Residents watched nervously from their porches, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. For days, inspectors combed the area, comparing satellite images of the waterway before and after the alterations. Their conclusion was damning. The HOA had violated multiple environmental laws, including protections for wetlands and endangered species habitats. When the fine arrived, it hit like a thunderclap. A letter addressed to the HOA board outlined the staggering penalty, $620,000. The amount wasn't arbitrary. It included funds earmarked for restoration efforts to reverse the damage. For a modest-sized HOA operating on annual dues, the figure might as well have been millions. Panic rippled through the community as news of the fine spread. Homeowners who had shrugged off earlier warnings now realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a financial disaster waiting to happen. Board members scrambled to address the crisis. Emergency meetings devolved into shouting matches with homeowners demanding accountability. Accusations flew thick and fast. "Why didn't you check the laws before starting this project?" cried one angry resident. "Who approved the budget for all this concrete?" demanded another. Fingers pointed in every direction, but no one stepped forward to take responsibility. Several board members resigned outright, citing stress and public backlash. Others faced personal liability lawsuits filed by disgruntled neighbors seeking compensation for flood damage. In the midst of the chaos, Emma emerged as an unlikely leader. Her calm demeanor and deep knowledge of the waterway earned her respect from both sides of the debate. She rallied residents, urging them to focus on solutions rather than blame. "We can't undo what's been done," she said at a packed community meeting, "but we can work together to make things right." Her words resonated with many, especially younger families who wanted a brighter future for their children. With Emma's guidance, a coalition of homeowners and environmental advocates drafted a plan to appeal the fine and negotiate a more manageable payment schedule. At the same time, they pushed for transparency and accountability within the HOA. New leadership elections were scheduled, with candidates promising stricter guidelines and better communication moving forward. Emma herself declined to run, preferring to focus on advocacy work. Instead, she collaborated closely with state ecologists to design a rehabilitation plan for the waterway. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Restoring the waterway to its former glory would require years of effort, careful planning, and significant resources. But for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. Residents began volunteering for cleanup projects, removing debris and planting native vegetation along the banks. Children joined in, scattering wildflower seeds and learning about the importance of ecosystems. Slowly but surely, the community came together, not to conquer nature, but to heal it. Even as progress unfolded, reminders of the past lingered. Patches of concrete still marred the landscape, serving as stark symbols of human hubris. Yet they also stood as lessons learned the hard way. For Willow Creek Estates, the price of arrogance had been steep, but perhaps not too high to overcome. As Emma looked out over the damaged waterway one evening, she allowed herself a small smile. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was turning. And in Serenity Bay, harmony felt just within reach. Years passed and the once devastated waterway of Willow Creek Estates began to show signs of life again. It wasn't an overnight transformation. Nature doesn't heal that quickly. But with time, effort, and unwavering dedication, the community witnessed something remarkable: renewal. The scars left by bulldozers and concrete were slowly fading, replaced by green shoots, flowing water, and returning wildlife. What had been a barren wasteland was now on its way to becoming a thriving ecosystem once more. Emma Carter stood on the edge of the waterway one crisp spring morning, watching sunlight dance across the rippling surface. Fish darted beneath the clear water, their silver scales catching the light. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs mingling with the gentle rustle of reeds swaying in the breeze. A blue heron stood tall near the bank, its reflection shimmering in the calm shallows. For Emma, this moment felt like redemption, a testament to what could be achieved when people worked together for a common cause. The restoration process hadn't been easy. Removing the concrete barriers had been a painstaking task, requiring specialized equipment and careful planning. Workers had to dismantle each section piece by piece, ensuring they didn't cause further damage to the fragile ecosystem. Once the concrete was gone, soil erosion became a major concern. To combat this, volunteers planted thousands of native plants along the banks. These plants not only stabilized the ground but also provided food and shelter for returning wildlife. Wildflowers bloomed in vibrant colors, attracting bees, butterflies, and other pollinators back to the area. Over time, the water quality improved significantly. Stagnant pools gave way to flowing streams, allowing fish populations to rebound. Minnows, bass, and even trout returned, much to the delight of local anglers who had missed casting their lines along the waterway. Frogs croaked in the evenings, their calls echoing through the neighborhood as if announcing the return of balance to the land. Even the air smelled fresher, filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and blooming flowers. For the residents of Willow Creek Estates, the changes went beyond just aesthetics. The flooding issues that had plagued them after the initial alterations disappeared as the restored waterway resumed its natural role in managing stormwater. During heavy rains, the channel absorbed excess water instead of letting it spill into basements and garages. Homeowners no longer dreaded weather forecasts predicting storms. Instead, they trusted the waterway to do what it had always done: protect and sustain. As the physical landscape healed, so did the relationships within the community. The crisis had brought out both the best and worst in people, but ultimately, it had forged stronger bonds among neighbors. Families who had once argued bitterly over the HOA's decisions now shared meals and laughter at block parties. Children played together along the banks of the waterway, skipping stones and chasing dragonflies. Older residents reminisced about the past while teaching younger generations how to care for the environment. Emma often found herself at the center of these gatherings, sharing stories and lessons she'd learned throughout her career as a marine biologist. She organized workshops where kids built birdhouses, planted trees, and learned about the delicate balance of ecosystems. Every creature has a job to do, she would explain, pointing to a frog perched on a lily pad. Even the smallest bug plays a part in keeping this place healthy. Her passion inspired others to take ownership of the restoration efforts, fostering a sense of pride and responsibility within the community. The HOA underwent significant changes as well. New leadership implemented stricter guidelines for any future projects requiring thorough environmental assessments and public input before approval. Transparency became a cornerstone of their operations, with regular updates posted online and open forums held quarterly. Residents felt empowered to voice their opinions, knowing their concerns would be heard and addressed. Gone were the days of unilateral decisions made behind closed doors. Financially, the $620,000 fine proved challenging but manageable thanks to the installment plan negotiated with state regulators. Fundraisers, grants, and volunteer efforts helped offset costs, easing the burden on individual homeowners. While the fine served as a painful reminder of past mistakes, It also motivated the community to prioritize sustainability moving forward. Many residents invested in eco-friendly upgrades for their homes, such as rain barrels and permeable driveways, to reduce their environmental impact. Perhaps the most profound change was the shift in mindset. Willow Creek Estates had learned a hard lesson about the consequences of tampering with nature. Residents no longer viewed the waterway as a problem to be solved or controlled. They saw it as a vital part of their lives, deserving of respect and protection. Signs were installed along the banks, educating visitors about the history and importance of the ecosystem. Walking trails were added, encouraging people to connect with the natural beauty surrounding them. Emma reflected on how far they'd come during a quiet evening stroll along the waterway. She paused near a cluster of newly planted saplings, their leaves fluttering softly in the breeze. Nearby, a family of ducks paddled lazily in the shallows, unperturbed by her presence. It was moments like these that reminded her why she'd fought so hard to save this place. The waterway wasn't just a body of water. It was a lifeline, a teacher, and a symbol of hope. Her thoughts turned to the children who had grown up witnessing the restoration process. They wouldn't remember the waterway in its damaged state. To them, it was simply a source of joy and wonder. One day they might tell their own children about how the community came together to heal this precious resource. And perhaps in doing so they would carry forward the lessons learned here. Lessons about resilience, cooperation, and the importance of living in harmony with the environment. Though scars remained, both literal and metaphorical, the story of Willow Creek Estates served as a powerful reminder of humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. Mistakes had been made, but they hadn't defined the community. Instead, they had sparked a journey toward understanding, healing, and renewal. As Emma walked home under a sky painted with streaks of orange and pink, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The waterway was alive again, and so was the spirit of the people who called it home. In Serenity Bay, peace had finally returned, not because nature had been conquered, but because it had been embraced. And in that embrace lay the promise of a brighter, more sustainable future for everyone.